お前はもう死んでいる。何？
Welcome, my friends, to my semi-short guide to what I think is the coolest and most stylish rogue build in Diablo 4, the FROSTBURN Rogue. What you're seeing in front of you is me clearing Zenith, I think, I don't know, 40, 45, something like that. Doesn't really matter to me anymore. Inside of about 3.5 minutes, I guess. I would say my average Nightmare Dungeon clear speed is 3 to 4 minutes, and about half of that time is wasted on looting, and Zenith's considered to be one of the much longer and more arduous ones. The FROSTBURN Rogue is awesome. It's ridiculous. It's so cool. It was a long journey getting here, and I'm going to go through the build, and I'm also going to kind of go through how do you get there, because obviously it's dependent on FROSTBURN dropping for you. But no worries, that's a fairly common, unique drop, and outside of that, there are lots of things you can do. The first thing I'd say on my journey of exploration, I knew immediately upon playing a rogue that I could not live without Shadow Step, Concealment, and Dash. They just feel so good. You use them all in tandem. Concealment is a ridiculous initiation tool as well as an escape tool. Shadow Step, same thing, awesome, instant speed. And then, of course, Dash is obviously Dash. So these three skills in tandem allow you to basically clear any dungeon and go anywhere with ridiculous lightning speed. On top of that, I knew that I wanted to use 2 imbuements. Okay, long story short, I actually spent a good, probably level 1 to 50 using Frost and Poison imbuement because I thought it was very stylish, which is what led to this FROSTBURN build. The problem is, Frost imbuement is amazing on Flurry. And I think there is a legitimate Flurry build there. The problem with Flurry is it has horrible single target. I think when you get to the higher levels and you can stack Lucky Hit, it's a lot better because you can take advantage of bursting Venoms, and we'll get to all that, but this is not that build, but I think there's definitely a build there. And if you're using Flurry, you need to use Frost. But here was my problem. I love Twisting Blades like everyone does. The freedom, the feel of it, it functions so well. But it was not working with Frost imbuement. You know, Shadow and Poison, amazing. But then I had this dream. I said, God damn it, I want to freeze stuff. It's so cool to freeze stuff and poison them and explode them. How can I do this? And I spent, so just to note in terms of legendary drops, everybody and their mother has the Penitent Greaves that create this frost pool under you, right? And I had nights where I stayed up trying to create all these meme builds using aspects so I could drop grenades and freeze things and still use Shadow and Poison. They never dropped, but at the same time, what it forced me to do was create a far better build, which is the FROSTBURN Dual Imbuement Rogue. And actually, I think it's far more effective because we're taking advantage of 3 very important things, some little tricks I discovered on my journey. One, of course, the FROSTBURN. We're cutting straight to the chase. We're not doing some meme and using the all-powerful Penitent Greaves to chill stuff around you. We're just freezing stuff. Okay? Now, you might say to yourself, oh, man, you're losing your glove slot, you're losing a bunch of lucky hit, but here's the trick. If you look down on your imbuement tree, there's a wonderful little passive that increases your lucky hit for non-physical attacks. Now, what is a non-physical attack? That's poison, and that's the explosion from Shadow imbuement. Now, we're going to use that in conjunction with what I think is a highly underused aspect, which is amazing, called Aspect of Shared Misery. Which means when you crowd control something, there's a 50% chance it's going to spread to something else. We stick that on the amulet slot, goes up to 75, it's ridiculous. We freeze 5 mobs, we just freeze 10. We freeze the whole screen. And then, of course, to finish it off, I've looked at almost every class's passive. I do not know of passive more powerful than this, which is, of course, Frigid Finesse, which after you get an amulet with +2, you upgrade it to +3 once it's past 725 item level. You're doing 60% multiplier to frozen enemies, which is ridiculous. There's just nothing better. So you put all these things together, and your clear speed is just insane. You are highly cooldown dependent. You run from pack to pack to objective. Once you get all those cooldown skills on your helm, your amulet, whatever else, you know, you're looking at maybe a 10-second window. So go in, conceal, hit the mobs 4 times. You're using Shadow imbuement. Then you're using Poison. You dash out, everything dies. You're on to your next elite pack. You're on to your next objective once those 10 seconds are over. And like I said, it just feels so good. Anybody who plays Rogue in Diablo 2, there's really no going back. Another thing to note, you might notice I am not using a basic skill because I don't have room for it on my hotbar. But regardless of that, basic skills are for losers. I haven't used a basic skill since I was like level 25. You don't need it. There's no room for it. It's awesome. Forget the basic skill. Let it go. Let it sail on home and live forever. And it's really sad for me when I see all these rogue build videos and I'm like, but you don't have concealment, bro. You don't have shadow step. They can't fit it in because they're using a basic attack. And I just feel sad for them. So let's pop into it. Okay, my friends, we're chilling in Ked Bardu. We're going to do a run through of the gear, specialization. We're going to look at the Paragon Board, the skills, all that good stuff. If you haven't played the game, you haven't had the Paragon Board yet, it looks really confusing, but once you get your hands on it, it's very easy. I'll get to that, but we're just going to run through one at a time in terms of endgame when I'm running here. We've got Aspect of the Protector for the barrier on the helm. Just to point out the stats of this helmet because it's sweet. Max cooldown reduction, max energy, shadow imbuement, and poison imbuement. Love it, but I'm not going to go too much into gear stats. We've got the Mangler's aspect on the armor, which also causes your lucky hit to cause daze, as well as all the freezing we're doing. An interesting note here, I'm not sure if they share the same roll pool, and if you roll lucky hit, you can either daze and freeze, or both, or one or the other. I'm sure that will come out later in the game's history. What I notice is I just daze and freeze everything, so why not? It's all the more crowd control, and once you crowd control an enemy, that's when your damage really goes up. Of course, the all-important Frostburn, which has great stats. You've got critical strike chance on there, which is excellent. A lot of your abilities depend on critical strike. Cold duration, freeze duration, not that great, but the freezing effect in conjunction with your passive is ridiculous. Right now I've got a 20% roll. I want to find a 25, but not anytime soon. In terms of the pants, we have the all-important armor aspect. This is made very early in the game. There may be nerfs or may be buffs. I'll tell you right now, 90% of classes are running vulnerable damage, crit damage, primary stat. They're all running the armor aspect because it's so good. Things may change in the future, but right now it is excellent. And you definitely want 4 ranks of concealment on those pants because concealment is so nice. And when you get that extra 4 ranks, it lines it up with your other skills. We have the extra charge of Shadow Step on the boots, of course. Definitely get movement speed on your boots. The additional charge of Shadow Step is everything. And that was another bummer about running Penitent Greaves, because that takes your boot slot, which means you need to use your amulet slot for the additional charge of Shadow Step, and that sucks. That is, of course, because the Shadow Step aspect is a mobility aspect, and that only goes on boots or neck. But I'm getting too much into detail here. On our weapon, we have the imbuement. Oh god, what is it called? My mind is blanking. The corruption imbuement. Your imbuement skill effects have 80% increased potency against vulnerable enemies. So good. And our primary skills we're using here are imbuments and crowd controls. I am not putting that much stock into the twisting blades itself. I think this is much more valuable. Another note here, as I talked about before, if you look at my crossbow, this is about a perfect roll, at least for me. Max dex, close to max dex, close to max critical strike damage with abuse skills, vulnerability damage, and critical strike damage. And of course, you need to use a crossbow. Until they change some aspects of the game, a crossbow is 1,000 times better for a rogue than a bow because it has innate vulnerability damage. If you look up on the top there, an extra 60% vulnerability damage. So in total, that's 110% vulnerability damage. That's ridiculous. There's a million videos on this. I'm not going to go too much into it. Damage buckets versus additive damage. But basically, the long story short is your damage is your main stat, which is dex, times your crit, times your vulnerability damage, times everything else added into one bucket. So your crowd control damage, your damage to poison, your damage to close enemies, that all gets added together, which is nice. But it does not have nearly as effective an effect as vulnerability and critical strike. It's 100 times more. So you want to stack those at least now in the game. Going to the amulet, I have the Shared Misery, as mentioned before. This is actually a low roll because I have an amulet with move speed, max cooldown reduction, and I'm probably up to 20 million a roll trying to get Frigid Finesse on it. It's a nightmare. I was saving that max roll for that. Anyway, all important, if you look here, 3 ranks to Frigid Finesse. That adds on to your 3 ranks in the skill tree. You get 60% multiplier damage to frozen enemies. It's ridiculous. They're probably going to nerf it one day. It's so incredibly strong. Going down here, we have the Loop of Bursting Venoms. This is a long conversation. This skill will basically carry you to level 90. I don't know why it took so many streamers so long to catch on to this. When you look at the skill, it looks like an extremely low chance to proc this. You have to get a critical strike, and then it's a 10% chance, which is as low as it gets. Once you get a couple of lucky hit rings and some gloves, you will proc this all the time, like gangbusters. And what it lets you do, the poison pool is irrelevant. What it lets you do is constantly cast Poison Imbuement. Your spinning blades, and this is why Twisting Blades is so good, will spin around and constantly apply the Poison Imbuement, and you end up doing 20,000% damage, poison damage to enemies. This will carry you through the game, literally. This is what got me, like, I think I moved into tier 4 with Elias at, God, what level was I? Like 60 or so? I don't even know what level I was, maybe less than that, because this thing carried me. It will carry you. A very interesting note, I am considering taking this off at about level 90. I have not really used it for a long time because I do so much damage at this point that I rarely take advantage of the extra charges it provides. With the exception of running into the Butcher and World Bosses, and definitely always keep one on you, I rarely use the infinite Poison Imbuement anymore because everything just dies. If you go back to the video, the boss dies in 2 Poison Imbuments, and I mean just hitting the button and applying it twice. So I actually think once you get to the highest level, it's not that relevant if you're clearing nightmare dungeons. So I've just had it on my ring so long, but I've heavily considered replacing it with this, which is making an enemy vulnerable, has a 50% chance to grant 3% critical strike up to 9%. A lot of your resource generation, your lucky hits, a lot of stuff is based on crit. Crit is awesome. I think late game, replace the ring with this. If you're talking about a tier 50 nightmare dungeon, when you approach the end boss, just have Poison Imbuement already equipped. If he's got a lot of health, Poison Imbuement, right? Hit twice, Shadow Imbuement, hit twice, your next Poison Imbuement's up, hit him twice, he's dead. Like, you don't need Bursting Venoms anymore, but there is no doubt that this will carry you all the way to 90. It's so good, but I think not good at this level anymore. Opportunists, this is so you don't die, especially when you enter those higher level nightmare dungeons. This works with concealment. You conceal. Conceal also, of course, gives you, the invulnerability to crowd control, so it's extremely useful. But you engage an elite pack with concealment. The second you unconceal, they are stunned by the stun grenades, so they don't kill you in one hit. And rogues, of course, are very, very squishy. So this is wonderful. On top of this, stunning them, you're also crowd controlling them, and everything you crowd control, you do like 400% damage to. So it's a win-win. And then, of course, on our blades here, we have the all-important Twisting Blades. You need this. You need to put it somewhere. You need those blades to twist around you. And then on top of this, we have the Ashieras Kanjar, which I'm sure I've pronounced wrong. This was a pretty recent addition. I got this to drop at level 85. I really like, and this is later on in the build, you don't want super high attack speed early game because you're not using basic attacks. You're not regenerating that much energy. But late game, you have a lot of tricks to do that. And increasing your attack speed is just beautiful. It just feels so good. So when we look at this weapon, the basic skill damage is, of course, a disaster. We don't need basic skill damage. The damage controlled enemies is nice. 25% movement speed after killing elite is awesome. That can also roll up to 42%. I wish I had that. And then, of course, the all-important lucky hit chance. Lucky hit, if I forgot to mention, you definitely want to have that on your rings. Your entire build is based around lucky hit, and we sacrifice that by running Frostburn because gloves roll lucky hit and they roll really high there. But believe me, when you got it on your rings, you have more than enough to make this work. You do not need this. I just like this weapon. It just feels good. Of course, it's also very stylish to have a dagger and a sword. Those swords are better because they give you critical strike damage. So once again, this is not dependent on the build. It just feels really good. If you get a high drop of this, it just adds to the build. It feels good. If you don't have this, and I'll go into that later, I would just put critical strikes with core skills, increase your attack speed by 25%, which is always nice. And once again, this is end game when you have the lucky hit chance and you have everything to regen those hits, right? Because we're not using a basic attack skill. Going into specializations, inner sight. You don't have a basic attack. You don't have an ultimate. It's all inner sight. The nice thing is, later on in the game when you have really high attack speed, this is proccing all the time. But otherwise, it's just wonderful. Inner sight is awesome. It's awesome against bosses. It pops off. You just kill everything. But we are not about twisting blades here. We're about the imbuements we're implying with Twisting Blades. We're about the crowd control. We're about that instant clear, kill the elite pack in 1 second. Everything's on cooldown. We dash, we shadow step to the next elite pack, to the next objective. Okay, going to the skill tree. Pretty basic stuff here. We do 2 points to unlock the next tree. I've actually been moving around points. This should be 5, but once again, you're actually point starved on a rogue, but it is what it is. I'll tell you a trick later on. Twisting Blades, of course, we take the advanced Twisting Blades for the cooldown reduction. Down here, once again, we should have 3 of this, but we're point starved to make this build work. We do have the all-important siphoning strikes, so this is huge endgame. You heal, the more damage you do, the more life you heal, so it's wonderful. We go down to the third tree. This is 1 point. My boots have 4 to each of these skills, but this is 1 point into Shadow Step, and then Stun with the Shadow Step, which is crowd control again, and you just do a ton of damage to anything you Shadow Step, and then Dash. As I was leveling up, I had this level 5 because this does lower your cooldown, and having the lowest cooldown possible dash is wonderful. We take the reduced cooldown when you go through a crowd control enemy because you go through a lot. 2 points that could be saved, once again, if it's discovered that the daze effect from Aspect of the Mangler does not coincide with the Frostburn Freeze effect, and you have to get one or the other, etc., etc. But you definitely want 2 points here, because when you critically strike a dazed enemy, you knock them down, and that's just sweet. It feels good. To be honest with you, I could probably take both these points out right now. It's just kind of fun, but once you daze something or freeze it, they're already dead in 1 second anyway, so actually, you don't need these. Yeah, let's take those out. I don't need those. It's fun, but just everything's going to die anyway, and it doesn't work for bosses. 1 point into concealment, it's awesome. 4 points on the pants, gets you the cooldown you need to kind of rotate everything in your cooldowns. And then, of course, you want subverting stealth to make enemies vulnerable for 6 seconds. We are, of course, taking the Paragon node. That's going to give you instant vulnerable to everything. But this is double the duration, and that's really nice. Though what is also really nice is the guaranteed crit you get on breaking concealment. But right now, I'm taking this. We go down to the tree. Your big daddies, your bag boys, your big hitters. Poison imbuement is amazing. We go up here, we take the crit chance. We don't really like the lucky hit one. It's not quite as good, at least in my opinion. And then what we do with this, because really we don't care about the vulnerability anymore, everything's going to be dead in 3 seconds, so we take the increase of 12% multiplier to non-physical damage, which is going to help your poison damage. I like taking 1 or 2 here for an extra stun chance, and most importantly, get a little more energy. Now that we freed up 2 points, we'll max that out. And then definitely you want the 9% increased critical strike chance with imbuements, because all we're using in imbuements, our life is around imbuements. And then, oh, this baby right here, if you look, the 6 out of 3, because we have the plus 3 points on the amulet, you deal 30% increased chance to chilled enemies, but the big one here, this bonus increases to 60% against frozen enemies. That is a multiplier, that is not additive, it is ridiculous, you kill everything, it is awesome. We go down here, this is the one other change I would make, and then I would probably get more into some of the more important passives here, like that damage reduction. Right now, because I'm trying to re-roll this element, this amulet with move speed, I have haste, which gives you above 50% maximum energy, 15% increased movement speed. While you're leveling up, this is excellent. Get this, it's awesome. When you're at the level I'm at, it's not really worth it anymore if you're running an amulet with boots with max move speed. You don't really need the increased attack speed below the energy. It's nice to have, but the points could go elsewhere, so I would put those into damage reduction passives, more damage passives. But right now I have them because I don't have that damn amulet yet. And then very, very importantly, lucky hit up to a 30% chance to gain 8 energy. You really want that. And then this is the really big one, Alchemist Fortune. Non-physical damage you deal has a 15% increased lucky hit chance, which is what allows us to freeze everything with Aspect of Misery. Going to the Paragon board. I'm going to try to be quick. If you haven't played the game yet, this looks very confusing. To make a long story short, this is your crowd control board. This is your imbuement board. We opened that up second. This is your vulnerability board, and this is your inner sight board. If you're going to take this, I'll get to that in a minute. Going through this, you might notice, and this is a late game build, if you look at the board, I'm basically just traveling to the yellow nodes, to the glyph nodes, and to the all-important legendary nodes. That is where all your damage is. There's no point, at least in my opinion, of taking blue nodes, and I'll get to this in a second. I'm just taking this because actually I leveled up just making this video. This 10% critical strike is really good, but otherwise I don't even take the blue nodes unless they're giving me stats to unlock my glyph abilities. The reason behind this is, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about this, yellow nodes, rare nodes, which is right here, for example, are worth like 30 times any other node. Certainly gray nodes, even blue nodes. The only other nodes, of course, are your glyph nodes or your legendary nodes, which are going to give you multipliers. Rare nodes are so good, it's ridiculous. And when I say they're worth 30 times, the reason why I say this is, right now looking at this node, it's 20% vulnerable damage. That's because I have the stat requirement. But let's say originally it was 10% vulnerable damage, okay? So if you look at a node like this blue node, it's 5%. So you say to yourself, oh, that rare node, it's worth like double a blue node. And blue nodes are like double gray nodes. So that the rare node's worth like 4 times that. Not even close, okay? Because on top of that, and this is actually a bad example, most rare nodes, you get plus 10 dexterity. So that's 2 more nodes right there because your average dex node is 5 dexterity, your gray node, right? So we'll go to this one, right? It was 15%. Then you got the additional. So on top of that, when you hit the stat requirement, you get double the initial effect. So now this is 30% to crowd control enemies, okay? So now you can say, oh, well, this is worth like 8 times a blue node, and then, of course, the dex is worth like 2 gray nodes. Man, this is worth like 10 nodes. No, it's worth like 30. Because what's important to look at here is when I click this one button, it's 1 skill point. It's 1 skill point of value for all these stats. And were I to take all the blue nodes around it, if I take all the blue nodes, if we look here, if I take these blue nodes and these blue nodes, all that, that's 8 skill points. That's enough to get to another yellow node. So why would I take the blue skill nodes when I can get to another yellow node worth 30 times any other node? So I think this is so important to realize that. Of course, this is build dependent. If you're playing a necromancer that uses bone skills and you have 1 bone tree, yeah, probably better to take all the plus to bone damage blue nodes. But I think certainly for this build, and I think for a lot of builds, when you get to the late game, you need to respec your board and just go for orange glyph nodes and yellow nodes. Like, that's it. Just go there. Coming up here, in terms of endgame versus leveling, this is the crowd control board. This is excellent. If you've just unlocked the board and you have Aspect of the Mangler, I would start here because the crowd control bonuses are ridiculous, and I would take pretty much every node on this board. It's just 7.5%, 30%. You wind up, by the time you take this whole board, you know, maybe 50 to 55, 60 with 300% damage to crowd-controlled enemies. If you don't have that, I would actually start with the imbuement board, which I think is not quite as strong, but the nice thing, of course, is it's not crowd-control dependent, and you get all these plus and build imbued skill damage nodes. Once you get up to level 80, 85, 90, you're ready to respec. This is when we respec into this, and we create this little loop with the boards here. And we're just traveling to the yellow nodes. You know, if you really want to do this, you can pause, you can go, you can see how I did the little pathways here through all this stuff. But of course, it's very important to pick up the 20. This is so huge. I mean, the crowd control board is so good. 25% multiplier for nearby enemies that's crowd control. It's ridiculous. We pick up this here, crowd control damage. This is a crowd control damage node. I wish we could get that, but why would we go out of our way to take that when we can get to some more nodes? We open up this board second. The reason why we're opening boards up in a particular order is for every board you open up, the stats required for the bonus effects on the rare nodes become higher and higher. Oh yeah, and then obviously glyphs. Sorry, should have got to glyphs. This is, when you get the vulnerability glyph, just stick that in the first chance you have, because the vulnerability glyph is super powerful. This is the only place I love having a rare glyph. That is because you get the imbuement skill effects, have 20% increased potency as the bonus, which is awesome. And then you up these rare nodes, and these rare nodes are just really nice starting nodes. 450 armor, 22 dex, another 22 dex, 45% damage. They're just excellent. So there's that glyph. My glyph on this board is the crowd control glyph. Doesn't have to be in here, but this lines up with the slots and the stats. Multiplier to crowd controlled, 20% multiplier to frozen, and then of course just more crowd control damage. Coming here to the imbuement board, we've unlocked the vulnerable damage node, which is the node that everybody should unlock because this lets any enemy that you have damaged is vulnerable for 3 seconds. So you absolutely want that. And what we do here is a little trick to save us some points. We open up this board second, but then we just drop this, and then we come all the way around these two boards and take that legendary Eldritch node coming at the bottom. Because doing here, this wastes like 10 points. We can just save that 10 points and go here. Coming up here, good lord, what board is this? Oh, this is your vulnerable damage node, which is awesome. I think this is where I ended. Grab that exploit weakness, open up this glyph. This is the Bane glyph. I did a ton of testing with the glyphs. This is your 10% chance to deal double the amount of damage with your poisoning. This is excellent. I still haven't concluded if this is better or worse than the increasing your non-physical damage glyph. And were I to go to 100, I definitely put that in next. And then rolling around here, the reason why we're picking the Instinct board is this is an incredibly powerful node. The Nimble node gives you 5% attack speed, which is very hard to find on a rogue. Plus 10% damage, always nice. But the attack speed is amazing. And in fact, because I picked up these extra points leveling, this extra attack speed is just ridiculous. The attack speed is so good. Here we have the, what is that? Oh, very important. Increase your critical strike with your core skills. All we're using is core skills. And then also you're restoring the energy from your core skills, which is very nice. And then we finish off the board here. We pick up another rare node for imbuement, and then we pick up the legendary bounty. One more thing of note. So as I said before, as you unlock boards, the requirements go up. So right now, I actually don't have the required strength to do this vulnerable damage node, which is too bad. If I were to take this to 100, I would actually take this board out and do it as my last board. And the reason why is the only rare node we're picking up is the Nimble node. That only has a dex requirement, and your dex should be stacked sky high. So hopefully, as your 5th or 6th board, you can still unlock this. And what I would probably do is switch this board right here with, I think, what is it? No Witnesses is decent. Cunning Stratagem is actually pretty good. So I'd probably switch that with Cunning Stratagem, and you can pick up the Lawless, which is another 100 armor, dexterity, and then core skill damage, which is always nice. Nothing incredible, but it's nice to have. And once again, were I to take this to 100, replace that with the Lawless board, and then probably span out through here, and then put the Instinct board here. And then if you're doing 100, we're talking about 40 points. So you branch off, I don't know, somewhere else, maybe here, and then put one more board. And what we're really looking for is glyph slots at that point. On your 5th or 6th board, even at 100, you're probably not going to be able to unlock those rare nodes, but we want those glyphs because those glyphs are ridiculous. The next two glyphs I would put into this build, and once again, going over this, this is your Poison, this is your Bane glyph, this is your Critical Strikes, it's your Combat glyph, this is your Control glyph, your Efficiency glyph, which is right at the beginning of the board, and then this is your Vulnerable glyph. The other two glyphs I would probably put in, if I had the space, if I was level 100, would be this Canny glyph for non-physical damage, and then if you could afford the Dex, that's a nice one, but I don't like the magic node increase. Oh, there's another Poisoning glyph that increases your poisoning duration by 33%. So that's probably the last glyph I would put in is the Tracker glyph. So this is going to jump your power to the stratosphere. Okay, so one last thing I'm going to show you here. So this is a very quick little how do we get there, right? I went through this whole endgame build, but how do we actually get to endgame? Because we're blowing through the main game, which is a shame. I don't know if I'm going to make a review video for the game, but God, you know, pretend you're 12 again and actually go through the story mode and try to enjoy it. I mean, that's where a lot of the fun is. Right now, endgame is just running nightmare dungeons. Anyway, to get to where you get that Frostburn where you want to be, let's pretend you haven't gotten it yet. You're level 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever you're leveling up. These are the aspects I would use to get you there and the aspects I used. Aspect of the Protector, you get this to drop pretty early, which gives you that barrier. That's different. This is different. What I have here is the Aspect of Stolen Vigor. This gives you healing for every stack of momentum you have. Upon review of this video, I forgot to tell you what the ultimate last node I had was, and it is momentum. Momentum is awesome because every time you crowd controlled or frozen anything, the stacks go off and it gives you damage reduction, attack speed, movement speed. It's awesome. While it is no longer useful at level 90, this straight up carried me to 90. I think I got one of these around level 25, 30. And the healing is just insane off of this. So the stack of the momentum gives you healing. You get a decent roll like 100. That's 300 life per second, and that will absolutely take you to tier 4. Definitely want to grab yourself an Aspect of the Mangler, even though you don't have Frostburn. That way you can daze everything, you can crowd control everything and get those bonuses. Disobedience is the same. The armor's nice. Ravager's Aspect, when you can find it, for that additional shadow step. Corruption, obviously, when you can find it. Shared Misery. The other thing, because we don't have the unique in this spot, Aspect of Unstable Imbuements, which is when you cast your imbuement skill, you do this splash around you, which affects everything. This is yet another skill that was super good early levels, but as the late game continued on, it became less and less useful. But as you level up, this is a very good skill. It also works very well in conjunction with Bursting Venoms, as we've already talked about quite a lot, because as you get those infinite poison imbuements, you can constantly splash poison on everything and build up the damage. But as the game went on, I realized this was no longer that useful once you're past, 70, level 80. And then as we discussed before, I would replace that with the critical strike skill. And then if you get that rare dagger, then replace that unique dagger. And as I've already discussed, really late game, level 90, level 100, I don't even think you need Bursting Venoms anymore. And one last thing, we kind of went over it, we didn't. This is your skill board here, and what I didn't really talk about was the initiation and how you use everything in conjunction. This is bound to my mouse 1 key, so this is where your basic attack usually go. Shadow Step here is great. You can use it to automatically run through, and where we're using Dash and Shadow Step for the most part is just moving from pack to pack. And obviously your initiation, you conceal, you approach the elite pack on your terms. They have no idea what's going on. You unconceal with Twisting Blades. Your stun grenades go out. You have already tapped Shadow Imbuement, so you Twisting Blades twice. You hit Poison, you Twisting Blades twice. You Shadow Step, you dash out of there, bam, everything's already dead. So, I think we're done. Thank you for your patience. I had a lot of fun with this build. I think it's super trendy. It's really cool. It's really hip. I don't see anybody using Frostburn. I see a lot of people using Penitent Greaves, which has its own benefits, but in terms of the sheer awesomeness of freezing everything, in terms of automatically getting that passive bonus, which is just going to skyrocket your damage to the stratosphere, in terms of clear speed, the mobility of using all these skills in tandem, I think with the increase of EXP in Nightmare Dungeons, you could very easily level a character from 70 to 100 inside of a day. But then you have to do something with your life. So be careful out there. Make sure playing Diablo 4 doesn't break up your marriage, affect your social life, academic, professional life, whatever else. I appreciate you being here. I hope you had fun. See you around.